Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Hosts Jean and Tim, along with team members
Teresa, Linda, and Annie,
are master gardener volunteers for New York's Columbia and Greene counties. So if you're interested in gardening or nature, or nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, settle in. Enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we have something to say.
Hello and welcome back to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. I'm Jean Thomas.
And I'm Robin Smith.
Today we're talking with Steve Castles of Cedar Cliff Vineyard in Athens, New York. Steve has written a book called Grapes of the Hudson Valley and Other Cool Climate Regions of the United States and Canada. Today we're talking about the second edition, which is revised and updated to include New England grapes.
But Steve is more than just a grape guy. In addition to operating a vineyard and making wine, Steve spent his spare time for the past few decades serving as a full-time attorney for both the New York State Senate and the Department of Health. His areas of legal expertise were things like healthcare, financing, insurance law, racing and wagering, horse law, and municipal bond work. He was instrumental in authoring 25 or more laws affecting oversight of wine and other alcoholic beverages, including how such beverages were made, marketed, and sold. Welcome, Steve.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
This is the second of two conversations with Steve. His book, Grapes of the Hudson Valley, etc., covers such a broad area we decided to split the conversation in two. The first half of our conversation covers the finding, developing, and actual growing of the best grapes for our area. And now we will go into the product of all the labor, the wine. Steve was recognized as one of wine's most inspiring people of 2018. But Steve's been part of the grape growing and winemaking industry pretty much from birth. Steve, fill us in on what you consider the highlights of your career. I could list half a century's worth of credits, but let's hear it from your viewpoint.
Again, this is more of a hobby, so I try and look at it that way. I'm on my day job I worked for the state of New York and worked on laws, and that's what I did in politics. That's what I did. But it's a fun hobby, and I did things on the side. I mean, what was very valuable is, as a teenager and up until college, working at Bedmarl Vineyards and the people who worked there. So like Eric Miller, Mark Miller, his wife Dean, their son. In addition to Eric, there was Kim Miller. So I learned a lot about winemaking and about just the philosophy of how to do winemaking. And then the second place where I learned a lot of stuff was Hudson Chatham Wine Company, which when it was owned by Carlo DeVito and Dominique DeVito. And Brian Van Tuzen was also there. So I learned a lot about things that way. So I tended to have longer stretches with wineries, and then they allowed me to kind of make the different kinds of wines that I thought would be good with those grapes that I was working with. So I kind of do it that way. So I think that was the big thing that was helpful. I do a lot of classes, and I do groups like the Massachusetts Horticultural Society. I'm going to be speaking there recently with a grape grower group. So, by the way, I didn't do it in the first one, but I would like to tell you that that Grapes of the Hudson Valley book, you can buy it online, either on Amazon or through the publisher, which is Flint Mine Press.
And Flint Mine Press is the local
Yeah, they're in
publisher.
Cooksaki, yes. Okay. So it's kind of doing it that way. But the other thing, too, is talking to people. It was just really a lot of fun. And then I still make a lot of wines of these, I call my oddball varieties of 5 gallons, 10 gallons. So a lot of my friends help me. So Marty Wallace and Mike Svensson and then Vinny. There's a whole bunch of guys who help me during the fall when I'm doing this. We have a lot of friends who come and help us make wine, and that's very valuable too. So it's a lot of fun. So
I want to meet Vinny.
So winemaking is a very popular endeavor nowadays, but according to your research and experience, it's anything but new, and you've told us a lot about that. You did say in an interview that the Hudson Valley was a hotbed for grape hybridizers, and you have talked about that a bit. In the mid-1800s, you grow some of these varieties, including Jefferson, Duchess, Empire State, and Croton. Actually, Jean has had a bit of a walk around your vineyard, and the winemaking plant was really interesting. Can you tell us some more about that?
Before you do, I got to tell him. I saw the wonderful vat where he stomps on the grapes barefoot. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I wear rubber boots. I wouldn't.
Sure
There's bees in them. You don't want that. Yeah, like.
There are bees there.
Oh,
okay.
A million of them. Oh, yeah, you don't want that. And they're yellow jackets. They don't like people.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
No.
You don't want to do that. So, and again, there's two components. I mean, right now I work for Deer Native Grapes, which is in Walton, New York. So a lot of the grapes I either bring to that winery or they're produced there and they're sold commercially. But I still make a lot of smaller batches of like 5-10 gallons of these smaller varieties where we only have like 10 or 15 vines of these things. So I make them at my house and I keep them and then I bring them to different talks and things like that. So there's two places. So the place you saw was like where my experimental wines are made, but then most of them are made commercially at Deer Native Grapes.
Well, I'm glad I saw the cool one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in the book, Chapter 5 is called The Principles of Winemaking. It's clearly presented primer on the basics of wine production for the beginner. You start with the supplies and equipment needed, then you work through the steps from harvesting to bottling, and warn about the most common problems that may develop. Oh, and the line drawings are wonderful, by the way. How did you manage to distill such a big topic down to a single chapter? And what advice do you have for the new winemaker?
Before I wrote that chapter, I looked at a whole bunch of other books that are written about making wine, and they tend to be written by chemists. So they tend to talk about like ionization rates and things that really they tend to do it that way. And I think many at certain wine colleges, and I think Cornell's one of them, they're based on chemistry. So I actually one time I had an experience where I went to a winery in the Finger Lakes. We were buying some grapes, and I said, I want to see the grapes or smell the grapes, and they were already starting to ferment. He says, I have the sheets right here. You don't need to see them.
Oh, you can read them.
You don't have to talk. It's all right here. You know, the titrate velocity, pHs, that kind of stuff, volatile. And I said, well, I kind of pushed it. So he says, I'll humor you. I'll let you look at them. And I'm buying them. So, and I'm bringing them back. So
What a sport.
But I'm just saying that there's a mindset that like you just do the numbers and it doesn't matter what they look like. And I guess when I worked for Eric Miller and others, they were educated in France as far as winemaking, so it's much more holistic. So they look at them, they figure what they're like, and then you work. It's sort of like a baseball team. Every year is different depending on what life brings you. So you don't try and say, here's the formula, we're just going to stick to this formula. So when it came to writing this chapter, there were books written by the chemist types, but then you have people who write these books who are more like home recipe types. So what they'll do is they'll say, add 5 pounds of sugar to blah, blah, blah. But if it depends on the grape variety, it should be a very different number. Or there's a million different things, but they treat it more like a cooking recipe. And I was trying to find a place in the middle where you could describe exactly what was happening chemically, but also biologically, so that the novice could figure out how to do these things, and then how, if they had a problem, what the problem might be, and kind of doing it that way. So I tried to do an in-between thing where it wasn't the chemist, but it wasn't the person baking a cake.
Not only is there a distinct vocabulary attached to wine and winemaking, I was amazed at how many styles of wine to choose from. Rind type and dessert and rosé and full-bodied and sparkling wines. And every grape has its own little biography with suggestions for which style best suits. I haven't asked one of my third grade questions yet, so here's one. Dessert wines are interesting to me. You list sherry, port, and cassis. Can you explain these? I doubt I'm the only barbarian who is clueless but fascinated.
So, I think many different countries make many different kinds of dessert wines. So, but you're going to find a port comes from Portugal, a sherry comes from Spain. If you get cassis, they're made out of a red cassis. They tend to come from France. So they're all dessert wines. Or if you had like the sweet German Rhine wine, so like the Rheingaus or like the Spätlesers, what they are is they're made in Germany, but they're all made or Sauternes, which is a white made in like the Bordeaux area. So basically you've got like dessert wines that are made very differently depending on where they came from. So ports in Portugal, Spain has sherry, Sauternes is like lower France. If you have Rheingau or like a very sweet Rhine wine, That's Germany. They all have different things that they do. So that's kind of how you do it that way. So it's sort of like the origin of where it came from, how you make those different varieties.
So what's a native dessert wine?
I think we're actually specializing more in ice wines. You're seeing a lot more of that in the U.S.
Okay.
So, but that came originally from Germany.
I've fallen in love with the Jefferson hybrid. So I looked up its description in your book. You have it in the section describing the hybrids developed by James Ricketts out of Newburgh. I went to the specific grape and found information about parentage and bloom and harvest times and value as a table grape and a wine grape. We talked about this a little earlier. Why did you develop this system of grouping the hybrids by the hybridizers and then writing the detailed biographies of the varieties? It's a whole lot more interesting this way.
Well, that's one reason I did it that way, because it's more interesting. But also, too, if you're a reader and you want to know where the grape came from, they're all created by people. I mean, hybridizing grapes is a really difficult thing to do. And you have to do a lot of stuff to do it right. So,
wait a minute, the Concord grape isn't just a natural thing?
No, that's a hybrid too. That's a hybrid that has Semillon.
Clutch my pearls.
Yes. And actually we spent a lot more time in the second edition of the book. We wrote a lot about the New England hybrids, and that's a grape that came out of New England.
Okay.
And it came out of Concord, Massachusetts. So you kind of that way.
That makes sense.
Duh. But also Concord, I think liturgically, is like when you have a concord, it's like a special place, a religious place. Or like when you have like an agreement, like a concord or a concordiat, it's like an agreement between different lay people on how they will implement the word of God. So you do it that way. So that's what concord or concordiat means. So,
Okay.
But it's also that's why they named Concord, Massachusetts after that.
Wow, that was deeper than I expected to get.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but they're all, and also doing the second edition of the book, it has a lot of grape written by Rogers, and Rogers lived in Salem, Massachusetts, and he did a lot of varieties, but from those varieties, a lot of them moved to the middle part of the country, and there's a guy named T.V. Munson, who was a hybridizer in Texas. He used a lot of these grapes later on down the line. So a lot of the Hudson Valley grapes, the New England grape varieties, they were used, but they were also used as plant material for further breeds.
So that's their stepchildren.
They're stepchildren. That's why the Korean book's interesting, because a lot of the Rogers hybrids were used in Korea.
That's so international.
Yeah, it's just So it's just a progression. That's all it is. And that's why the book, the second edition, has a lot of stuff on the New England grapes, because there's not really a lot on that. But it talks about like who wrote them, why they did it, how do they propagate them. So, and it's like you don't do this by chance. I think there's actually you're seeing actually in the wine press and in the general press, there's more interest in trying to grow grapes sustainably. So, and most of the grapes that I use are hybrids. They're bred to be fungus disease resistant. Most vinifera grapes in Europe and in the U.S. now have to live on rootstocks because there's a bug called phylloxera which basically eats the roots. So you have to graft them, and you have to have American rootstock below and then the European grape variety above.
Okay.
With direct producers, you don't need to do that. So you don't have to graft them. So right now we're having a lot more warm winters accented by these polar blasts. I don't know if like last year, remember we got 0 temperatures on Christmas Day and Groundhog's Day. I mean, last year at this time, it was -5, if you remember. Oh. And it was like, in January, it was like 60, 60, 40, 60, 0, -5, -5, 60, 60, 60.
There's a challenge.
Grapes don't like that. And if you're on rootstock, it kills the plant above.
Right.
And the grape varieties that I grow are direct producers. It's the same thing. You don't have to graft them at all.
And is this industry-wide, this focus more on survivability? And now
I think you're seeing more. I mean, there are those, I think, in the wine industry, and I think it's because they like these varieties. They're ignoring the fact that things are changing very rapidly, and they believe their customer base is like, we only want Chardonnay, we only want Pinot Noir. And I'm thinking that for the younger generation, I don't think they care about whether it's a Chardonnay. They just want a nice, approachable white or a big, heavy red. So whether it's made from Chambourcin or Baco Noir or Pinot Noir, they don't care. So I think that way. So what I'm doing is a lot of the work that I'm doing is actually being used by other wineries to make new kinds of varieties of wines that are fun. And the other thing too is like with these hybrids, with the European vinifera's, there's really like 5 that you use, and that's it. So there's Chardonnay, there's Riesling, there's Cabernet Sauvignon, there's Cabernet Franc, there's Petit Verdot, and there's a few others, and that's it. So with the hybrids, there are hundreds of these varieties, and they all have very different flavor profiles. So that's why I think things are interesting in the state of New York, because we grow a lot of different grape varieties, so we can make a lot of different styles of wine. So I'm kind of doing it that way. But going back to the sustainability stuff is like, they don't need rootstocks. They can have warm winters and then accident by polar blast. They can have late spring frost. They can live through that. They're productive. You don't have to irrigate them. So there's a lot of pluses to the varieties that I'm using.
And they need less chemical intervention and less fertilizing
Like
intervention.
a third. You like if some of the Chardonnays that are being in here, they'll spray them 10 to 12 times every year, and they have to use the hot stuff.
Sounds like my peach tree.
Yeah, so you do it that way. And then I spray mine with like sulfur and like a few other minor things, and I do it 3 times a year. So you can spray hot stuff. When I say hot stuff, highly toxic stuff, 13 times, or not so hot toxic stuff 3 times. So I'm saying, as far as the cost of growing those grapes, it's a lot less because those chemicals are very expensive.
Well, and in the long term, you're poisoning the soil, you're poisoning whatever else is in
You are
range.
and you're not, because that's an odd thing. It's like the chemicals that they use now, they have a very short half-life, so they're highly toxic when you put them on. So it's not great for the grower, but after like say maybe a month or 2, they fall apart. So it's not like DDT, which stays around forever. They fall apart.
Oh, that makes
So-
me feel
That's
better.
yes, that does.
It makes you feel better, but if you're a grower, it means it's highly toxic and you might die, but at least it will go away.
Your customers
But
will be
you'll
fine.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the estate will be good.
Yeah. So a lot of the work I'm trying, like I said, when I'm doing a lot of my work now is identifying grape varieties that can be grown sustainably. And the other thing I'm finding I'm working with a lot more is I'm actually working with some cideries and some new places that want to grow grapes organically, which is really hard, but I'm getting a lot more questions and comments about growing things organically, how to do stuff. So I'm working a lot more with that. The other thing I'm kind of working on now too is, in addition to making wine, I actually work with local breweries, and we're making these co-ferments or VAs. So they are combination beer and grapes. Yeah, so there's actually, I mean, so I work with they make the beer, I just bring them the grapes, and they do it that way. But Subversive, which is in Catskill, Brewery La Hoff, which is in Cooksaki. There's Return Brewing, which is in Hudson. And then there is Hearts Be True, which is a cidery in Catskill. And then there's Left Bank, which is in Catskill. So I'm working with them, and they're all making these co-fermented beverages, which will have mostly cider, but up to 40% grapes in them. So I'm doing that.
Now, you're not bringing them the finished wine, you're bringing them the fruit?
There's various different ways. Sometimes all they want is the spent pumice. So I'll make a wine, I've got the pressings, they just want the pressings. So it's like stuff I was going to put in the landfill, and you get another use out of it.
What about sulfites? What is that about in wines?
What that does is it preserves the wine. And without sulfites, what happens is they become brown and they become vinegar.
Okay. I mean, is it true that in Europe those are not used so?
They use them a
Often?
lot. They
Okay.
use them a lot more than they use them here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, isn't it the sulfites that give you the hangover?
I don't know if that's true.
I know,
don't know.
that's what-
Yeah, I don't know if
I
that's
know
true.
that's what you wanted to know.
I think if you're allergic to sulfites, you'll probably get a headache from that, I
Yeah.
guess, but I don't know.
So all these new wines, and I've seen you in your nursery, and you look at one of your babies and say, "Look at this one! This one just showed up. I am so excited about what it's going to turn into." And I like that you mention wines as more a fun thing. Like I'm a big fan of Blue Nun and all those rosés that we drank as children. That's a whole totally different viewpoint.
They should be fun.
Yeah,
It should be fun.
It's like getting rid of the snobbiness.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell people when I teach classes, it's sort of like people aren't afraid to ask for a certain kind of beer at a restaurant. Well, it's same when you're a restaurant and you're like, well, what kind of wine? I don't know. What will they think about me? You don't think about that with beer. I view wine like beer. It's like, what do you feel like drinking? And that's what you drink. And just do it that way. It's a much easier way of doing it. So I'm not a big world-class guy. We got to do this and do that. Just good, solid wines at a good price. have a good day, move on to something else. So,
Yeah, they come at me with a wine list, and I go white. I mean, I just go into panic attack.
yeah.
So this is definitely much more fun.
So, and you should check the breweries because Subversive still has a little left of the Baco, they call Farmer's Grape Ale, I think. And then I think Return Brewing is coming up next, and they're going to have theirs ready in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and they're going to release and have a party and stuff like that. So,
Okay, now
Yeah.
you're talking about how when you go to these fancy places and there's chemists running them. Now, this sounds to me like it's like chemistry run amok with all these breweries saying, "Oh, goody, let's mix it with wine." I mean, they're having fun with chemistry.
no, I think they're more holistic. It's just sort of like, I mean, you want different flavor profiles in your beer. And what you're seeing in beer land is that you're seeing a lot more like hazy IPAs. You're seeing things that are purposely adding Brett and other microbiological things. So you're seeing beer not being a simple Budweiser beer anymore. You're finding things that are like much more high alcohol. They're a lot cloudier. They're adding different fruits to them. There's different stuff. So it's the same thing, only they're adding a lot more fruit when they do like the grape ale that I'm working with. But see, there's a immersion of those things, because what you're seeing in the wine world is that you're seeing people not making clean wines anymore. They're making pet nats and piquettes, which are like second wines where you add more sugar and water. If they got a little vinegar, that's okay. They're just kind of doing it that way. So you're seeing cloudy wines and you're seeing cloudy beers. So now you're seeing the cloudy beer people and the cloudy wine people. They're merging their stuff.
All these clouds and things.
Yeah.
Robin, are you visualizing downtown Catskill as a bunch of people running around with grapevines and wreaths in their hair and stuff?
And then the
Okay.
dispensaries are coming in also.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Across the river, we've got gin makers and stuff, right? Yeah. Oh, and the pot.
Yes.
Oh, that's going to be a happy downtown Catskill, I'm going to tell you. Steve, thanks for joining us and putting up with us. Your book has done the impossible act of combining the history and the romance of the wine industry with the earthiness of producing that romance. As educators, we have to address a lot of negativity. So we challenge you as a Renaissance man who combines deep historical knowledge with active field testing and all like that. What in this age of climate challenges gives you hope?
I don't know. I think sometimes some of the work that I'm doing as far as like trying to redirect agriculture to growing things that are easier to grow, that you can grow more sustainably, will help. It doesn't hurt. So, and if everyone does a few of these little things, that might help things. And again, I think the climate's going to change anyway, but at least you'll be able to have some tools in the toolbox to kind of be able to react to it, as opposed to saying we can't grow wine anymore, or we have to grow it at 5 times the cost. So I think that's kind of how I look at that.
Okay,
So.
I think your toolbox makes a whole lot of sense, and it's a whole lot more cheerful than a lot of stuff we hear.
Yeah,
So, well,
good.
thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Sandra Powers and Devin Connolly from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgb@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Counties Facebook page. For more information about Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties, visit our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org or visit us in Hudson or in Acra. Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal programming and employment opportunities